Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of the End of Dragons Q&A series where I'll be answering your questions or suggestions on what we can expect from the upcoming expansion. I am giving away 100 gold to one winner every episode, so if you'd like a chance to win, please include your account ID along with your question or suggestion. Our first winner for the Q&A series is nar.5693. Congratulations on your 100 gold win. Here's the video clip of me giving them their gold. And they asked, what are you personally most excited or hopeful for in End of Dragons and why? So there's a lot of things I'm interested with in the new expansion, new specializations, maybe new game modes, a new possible race, wink wink Tengu. Although if they did give us scripts, I would honestly be happy. I mean, why not? I would take scripts, right? Wouldn't you? Shinies and all that stuff. So the main interest for me would definitely have to be alliances. They were a huge part of Guild Wars 1. They were actually introduced in the first Guild Wars 1 expansion, Guild Wars 1 Factions, which was also set in Kanta, the same setting that we're going to go back to in Guild Wars 2. So it'd be great to see the expansion include alliances as we'll be coming full circle from the alliances in Guild Wars 1. Now, alliances in Guild Wars 1 is different from what they're suggesting in Guild Wars 2. For those that remember, ANET released a dev post about how they wanted to implement alliances for World vs. World in Guild Wars 2 a few years back. I think we're crossing about 3 years plus since that announcement was a thing. Alliances in Guild Wars 2 was mostly meant to balance the World vs. World population. It was basically going to have guilds allow their members to rep their guild as their existing alliance, and then basically 3-4 guilds can team up with each other. They did not release a specific number of how many guilds can be in an alliance, but they did say the alliance will cap at 500 people. And the main benefit for alliances in Guild Wars 2 was that if you're declared for a certain guild, which is in an alliance with other guilds, this meant that when matchups were reset after 2 months, you would basically be prioritized to be in your alliance. So that meant you didn't need to transfer too much, right? You're always going to be stuck with your alliance, which meant that you wouldn't, lose out from playing with your friends and guildmates. So that was the benefit. Now in Guild Wars 1, alliances is slightly maybe different. It's still kind of the same concept, but slightly different. Alliances in Guild Wars 1, basically, you had two factions, right? You had the Luxons and the Kurziks. Alliances in Guild Wars 1 can declare for either faction. Alliances in Guild Wars 1 included up to 10 guilds, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, you had one leader guild and 9 alliance guilds in the alliance. Now, the one thing that drove alliances in Guild Wars 1 were the faction points. After you declare for your respective faction, either Luxon or Kurzik, you earned faction points through certain game modes. Faction points allowed you to control towns, and also you could spend them on different scrolls or passages that take you to different dungeons or raids, kind of like small time raids or content in Guild Wars 1 that was just related to the faction you represented. The main thing alliances fought for in Guild Wars 1 were control of towns. Not just the rivalry between factions, but also the inner rivalry between alliances fighting for control of towns in their faction. So for example, an alliance on the Luxon side that had the most amount of points between all the Luxon alliances, that alliance, for example, controlled the main city. And then the second alliance with the most points would then control the second city, and then the third alliance with the most points would control the third city, and then so on and so forth. And that was also the same side for the Kurziks, right? Now, the way that alliances would gain these points were in 2 different modes. There was one PvE way, and there were 3 PvP modes. There was Alliance Battles, Jade Quarry, and Fort Aspenwood. Those were the 3 PvP methods. Alliance Battle is somewhat similar to what Guild Wars 2 World vs. World is, and it's also similar to PvP Conquest mode. Basically, Alliance Battle was 12v12, 12 from the Luxon side, 12 from the Kurzik side. You basically capture nodes, and then those nodes generate you points, and then the first team to reach 500 points overall would win the game. And that was alliance battles. And of course, there was different themed maps. It wasn't all in the same map. There's, I think, about 4 or 5 maps that you could play this in. And they would rotate every week. They would actually change the maps every week. Now, the second mode was Jade Quarry. And basically, this was a similar node system, except it was in an 8v8 map. And you don't get points from the node itself. You basically have an escort that you have to take to the node. They would take a Jade, and then they would put that jade stone back to their camp. And if you successfully retrieved it back to your camp, you would gain a point. And you could also kill the opposing faction's escort so that they would have to respawn from scratch. And the first faction that reached 10 points would win the game. The third mode was Fort Aspenwood. Similarly to how Jade Quarry was themed for Luxons, Fort Aspenwood was themed towards the Kurzik. The Kurziks would have to defend the fort for a certain amount of time, and if they were successful in that time period, they win the game. Luxons would have to breach the fort through 2 defenses and then kill, which is basically the fort's overlord, similar to the Keep Lord in Guild Wars 2. The other way to earn faction points was through PvE maps. Usually they would be set to the hard mode difficulty because hard mode would give you double points. So you could just farm the maps. Basically, you just kill all the mobs in the map and then you could refarm it over and over and over. And you repeat that till you have a lot of points, and that builds up for your faction, your guild basically, and then the guild totals up to your total faction points. Now, I would love to see if Guild Wars 2 can have somewhat of a town control. The cool thing about alliances in Guild Wars 1 was you had control over the towns, but then also your alliance would get a special private access area. It's very similar to how you have passes that give you access to special areas in Guild Wars 2. Except in towns that you owned as an alliance, it was only for your alliance. So only those 10 guilds could access it, right? No other guild can access it unless you're part of that alliance for that town. It was a nice feature that I think they could maybe include in Guild Wars 2. The other thing for alliances is definitely a leaderboard. They must think of some way to make alliances meaningful. And, alliances on its own for a population balance might not be enough. They need to make a reason why someone wants to be part of an alliance, right? So a leaderboard could help that. Maybe the overall total points of PPT, maybe the overall total points of PPK, right? Or how many hours were spent in World vs. World, or something to make it meaningful for alliances in Guild Wars 2. And of course, it would be cool if alliances controlled towns in Guild Wars 2. Now, how they would tie that in would be interesting, because in Guild Wars 2 World vs. World, we do own keeps and we can own towers and we can own camps. But because the game mode is 24/7, it's not really permanent. In Guild Wars 1, unless another alliance overtook another alliance in points, generally you're still controlling that town. But in World vs. World, it's kind of 24/7. I mean, you could own a keep for an entire matchup, right? From reset to reset. But it's very hard because you have to defend it. And of course, you still had to do some effort in Guild Wars 1 to make sure your alliance had the most points to own the best town or stuff like that. But it did feel more permanent. Rarely the towns change hand every week. It was mostly every few months. Other than that, though, I would love to see if they can somehow figure a balance to make alliances interesting in Guild Wars 2. Do you think ANET will bring new raids and fractals with End of Dragons? If not, do you think there will be a new alternative for real endgame like raids or fractals? Strikes and such don't count because I see them as stepping stones into that harder content. I do think ANET will most likely stick with raids and fractals in End of Dragons. I don't see any reason why they won't. So the only question you have to ask is, are we going to get anything on the release, or are they going to release a fractal or raid a little after the release of End of Dragons? Similar to how raids and Heart of Thorns came a little after the expansion release date, I don't think they would actually just abandon raids and fractals. Yes, there's been a huge gap in raids. We were still kind of waiting for Wing 8, right? And I think we just only recently had our last fractal in October, which was also about a year wait. But I don't think they would abandon that real endgame content. I think we'll more likely get another raid, another fractal with the expansion. Just depends on when they release it. But if we do not get raids and fractals, and maybe there's a new alternative for real endgame, if anyone else could think of a suggestion on what they could include as a new endgame content, feel free to leave your comments about this one. But I don't know, honestly, what they could include as an endgame. Dungeons were very endgame content in the core release of the game, although fractals is basically that and even more difficult. Right, they're a little bit more challenging than dungeons. So unless they have a new dungeon system, maybe that could be the new thing, or some combination of strikes and response missions that could be a bit more challenging, right? They maybe think of a better way to make that system more challenging. But other than that, I just really think we'll stick with raids and fractals. It would be cool to have a new game mode that's a new alternative endgame content. I would love to be wrong on this one. So if they do, it would be cool to see whatever they can come up with. Do you think housing can be a feature in the next expansion? We already have home instance, your personal home instance. We already also have guild halls as a thing. So I don't know if it would make sense for ANET to implement housing. I honestly, as much as I would love a housing system in Guild Wars 2, I just don't see it. I really think the personal home instance and the guild hall features really just cover what housing would be. So really, if you fit in housing, you're just fitting in another thing that basically it's the same as those two. It's just in a different way. And maybe, you're maybe selling the houses on the market, the land, or maybe you're just buying them from an NPC vendor. I would definitely not make houses tradable simply because that would just get bought out by all the rich players. So, housing would probably have to be something you buy from an NPC and it's just capped at a certain amount. The bigger the land, the bigger the cost. But I really see no use when we already have a personal home instance and a guild hall that's for guilds. It would defeat the purpose of those two for them to release housing. Now, I would love to see housing features included, but again, we already have decorations in guild halls, so maybe housing features included in the personal home instance. So that would probably be the only way I could see them adding housing in some capacity. Do you think that we will have a new set of legendary armor with the next X-Pack? If yes, how would that impact the economy? So I do believe we probably might get another set of legendary armor at some point. Again, this is a question of if they already had thought of something on release or if it's something planned a little after release. I do believe they have one set that they want to do. The previous set is beautiful. The animations of the current legendary armor is amazing, but it would be great to see another set. And I do believe they are working on another set in some capacity. If yes, how would that impact the economy? So the current set of legendary armor is not tradable. The only way it's impacted right now is simply because of the materials it takes you to acquire. So if they released another set going about what we have, I would assume they would not make the next legendary armor set tradable. So the only way it would impact the economy is dependent on what materials you might require to make that next gen. So that's really what it will come down to. Will you buy ANET? Soon TM. Hey Gildamem, how do you think mounts will be implemented in End of Dragons? I think we'll probably just get a few more mounts. I don't think they might change anything about mounts. We simply might just get something new. It's hard to say. We already have Skyscale. We already have Beetle, Griffin, Spring. There's already so many mounts, so we'll see what they add. It probably could be some creature from Kantha. So I think maybe a few mounts that come to mind. Maybe the Siege Turtle in Guild Wars 1. The Siege Turtle is basically the Luxon faction's kind of like mascot. Like, they have like Siege Turtles with cannons strapped to them. Although Siege Turtles in Guild Wars 1 are very large, so it's hard to see that as a mount. Probably have to be like some mini form of that, like maybe like a Siege Turtle baby or something. The other thing is maybe Juggernaut, which is the Kurzik's mascot. So maybe the Juggernaut carries you, or maybe, I don't know, you're sitting on its head or something. So that may be another possible mount. And that one is a little bit more realistic because they're not as big as the actual Siege Turtles in Guild Wars 1. And of course, I'm basing this on mounts that are basically in theme with Kantha. So the other thing that would come to my mind is a Kirin, which is a little similar to what a Jackal would be. You could even argue that could be used as a Jackal skin. Or you could maybe have that as a different mount with its own different features. But, again, that's a four-legged mount versus the Jackal, which is also a four-legged mount that's also primarily on land. I can't think of anything else aside from those three that comes to mind. If you guys have any other mounts that you think they might release, please put so in the comment section below. It's a suggestion we can elaborate on the next Q&A. Also, we could expect something entirely new. They could just create something out of the lore. I do believe currently right now the Springer and the Jackal were actually created out of lore for Path of Fire. So I don't think they actually existed before. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know we've always had Raptors. We've always had some sort of Griffins. And I guess Skyscales in some capacity. We've had some dragon mobs before. So maybe they could possibly create a new set of mounts that, just wasn't in the previous game in Guild Wars 1. Do you really think Tengu will be back? Haha, awesome idea. So Tengu definitely looks like it's going to be a part of the expansion. At least from what we know in the capacity of the story is they're definitely now finally interacting with us on a larger scale. We're helping them in the Dragon Response missions, take back and defend their lands. So in the expansion, I would expect they do play a big role. Whether they'll be an actual race, I do feel like that might be the only new feature ANET can introduce in the expansion. Because if you look back at Heart of Thorns introduced gliding. That was a game-changing feature. Path of Fire introduced mounts, also a game-changing feature. So what other game-changing feature could they release in End of Dragons that might actually shift the balance of the game? But what other possible game-changing feature could they even release at this point? So it's really not that much they could. And if there is, again, something that you guys could put in the comment section, maybe we can talk about it as well in the next episode. But I do think the only other game-changing feature could be race. Now, the reason for that, a new race has never been done before. We've never received one in Heart of Thorns, never received one in Path of Fire. We have received new specializations. We have received at least one new class, the Revenant class. So to add a new race, that would be the next game-changing feature for Guild Wars 2. So the way they would implement Tengu, and the only way I think they should implement Tengu, is definitely having it start from level 80. It makes no sense to start out from level 0 with a Tengu unless they create an entirely new story that's only related to them. I mean, I could possibly see that. But then that also means the maps in Kanta that we will get in the End of Dragons expansion, some of them might have to be starter zones. And that means they would have to increase the amount of maps they provide in that expansion. So if the starter zones are 4 or 5 maps, that also does not leave room for them to also add the next maps, which will probably be level 80 zones. So if they did start from 0, you could expect we'd have to have 10, 12 maps. But if they started from level 80, then we could probably expect our 5 or 6 maps in End of Dragons. So again, I think they definitely would have to implement them as level 80. So it's very similar to how the Death Knight is. If you had a level 80 character in WoW, or was it level 60, then you could make a Death Knight. So something like that for the Tengu. What do you think will be a Tengu Elite spec with the new expansion? The only one that I guess would make sense could be the Ritualist, simply because it's a Canton themed race. So along with that, that's a Canton themed class. In the original Guild Wars 1, it was its own class. So I would say maybe Ritualist would be the elite spec that goes for Tengu. But of course, specialization has nothing to do with the race. Specialization has to do with the class. So that would probably just be universal. So, it's not something that would have to be specific only to that race. Do you think ANET should or will put more effort into designing cultural armor sets for End of Dragons, Luxon, Kurzik, Imperial, Canton, etc.? I do think that's in the plan. Now, the question is whether or not they make them as outfits versus if they make them as their own armor sets. The benefit to the outfits is they can instantly plug them into the gem store and people will probably purchase those up. Although I think it'd be a shame to see them as outfits because they are very cool themes that we can play around with. And I would love to see the fashion wars that people come up with if they were just armor sets. Generally ANET's known for their fashion wars. So yes, that's something that you can expect from the expansion. Some very cool looking armors that we can enjoy. So yes. What is the first thing to look out for as a trading post Baron when the expansion hits? Also can't wait for the new elite specs. So as a trader, it's mostly at the end of the day, it comes to speculating, right? You can't really be 100% sure what will come out in the expansion, but you can have a guess. You can try and connect some dots. So maybe you could start with, okay, well, there might be legendary armor. There might be another set of Gen 3 legendaries, right? New Gen 3 weapons. So maybe you think about T6 materials. Maybe you think about Mystic Coins. Maybe Amalgamated Gemstones. Maybe ANET doesn't tie in the Gen 3 with either of those. Maybe they will make an entirely new different currency for that. And then, of course, you have to think about the simple stuff like metal, like wood. Are those going to go up? Is dust going to go up? Could those be an inclusion? And that's just for weapons and armors, right? Legendary weapons and armors. You could also speculate on other things like maybe crafting sigils, crafting runes. What new possible runes and sigils come out? What new possible metas they could make that would make existing runes and sigils go up in price? And so maybe you want to get into what crafting items you need for those runes and sigils and invest in those crafting items. Likewise, you could also speculate on what if they increase the cap of jeweler to 500. So then maybe you want to invest in jeweler items, right? Things that to do with that crafting profession. So again, it comes down to speculating. You want to connect dots, what runes or sigils go up in price, what possible materials can go up in price if they introduce weapons or armor sets, or what other upgrades they could add in. So it really, you have to make your own guesses and you invest with whatever materials you think are going to be the hits. And of course, there's going to be misses, but it gets easier when you have a lot of gold. So when you have a lot of capital to dump into items that you speculate, it's just easier for you, right? Because whatever ends up becoming true, you make money on. What doesn't become true either makes you somewhat money because you could still figure out a way to use them efficiently, or you might lose. So it's really, it comes down to how well you want to diversify. One thing that a lot of traders do when an expansion or a major update happens in the game is they typically want to be sure that whatever doesn't come out to be true, whatever item they invested in is the wrong item, they could at least still cover that loss in some capacities. So if you've ever invested in an item and that item turns out to be false, it's not something that's related to anything that the expansion wanted to bring out. So what you could do is make sure that you cover that before the expansion comes out. So if you ever lose money on that item, you technically recovered the money back from the investment, so that you're basically just break even at that point. It's still a loss because you didn't make money on that investment. But if you made the money back somehow, you made your profits and you covered the investment, then you're on the safe side. I'm excited for End of Dragons. Do you think there will be a tradable Generation 3 Legendary Weapons set? I don't think so. They will most likely go with account bound, the similar way how Gen 2s are. I feel like they've seen what the Gen 1 market can be, and they might just simply not want that to happen. Now, there is a prestige of owning a Gen 2 weapon, I feel, over a Gen 1, simply because with Gen 2, you actually have to play the game. You can't just outright just buy a weapon if you swipe your credit card with gems, or if you actually just have gold in the game to purchase one. Gen 2s right now are more prestigious. So I don't know if they want to go that route with Gen 3. So that way encourage a player to play more than to just outright swipe a credit card and buy a item, or if they just have a lot of gold, they just buy the item. Of course, that's just dependent on what they think. Maybe Gen 2s was not a good choice in their opinion, and maybe they want to make Gen 3s tradable. Of course, there is a plus of having tradable weapons. Some people just don't have the time to commit to the game, and they maybe might not be able to grind out a full legendary over time, and maybe they just want the easy way out. And not because that it's an easy way out, but maybe because they just don't have time to commit. And for them, maybe trying to obtain a legendary weapon the traditional way is something that would take them 5-6 months versus someone who could do it in 1 month. So yeah, I mean, it also, time does help here, right? If you're someone who only has maybe an hour to play a day or 2 hours to play a day, there's not much you can do besides maybe only dedicate that 1 hour or 2 hours to trying to make that weapon. And we all know that could be difficult, especially if you don't have the funds. So yeah, overall though, I do think it's most likely going to be account bound, simply because Gen 2 is account bound. I see no reason why they want to go back to tradable. Of course, for me as a trader, I would love for them to be tradable. It just opens up a new market to get into, a new set of materials to trade with other traders. Anyway, that would be it for this week's Q&A, guys. If I did not answer your question, don't worry, it could still come up in the next Q&A series. If there's more questions that you'd like to ask and anything else you'd like me to elaborate on in the next Q&A, please drop a comment, and it could also be featured in the next Q&A video. Of course, make sure you put your account ID with your question or suggestion, as you might be the winner of the next 100 gold giveaway. But that's it, guys. I appreciate all the comments and suggestions. This was a great start to the Q&A series. I hope to do more of these. If you like the video, please leave a like. It does help with the algorithm. If you like the content of this channel, you might want to consider turning on notifications. I hope to hear more of your questions and suggestions in the next Q&A video. The next video will be out next Wednesday, so you have plenty of time to get your comments and suggestions in. And of course, anyone that I missed from the previous video, you still have a chance to be included in the next Q&A series. Thank you guys so much, and until then, I will see you when I see you.